The Funhouse Corpse. In the winter of 1976, a television crew was setting up a shot inside a funhouse at an amusement park in Long Beach, California. A crew member needed to move a neon orange glowing prop hanging from a fake gallows. When he grabbed the arm to shift its position, the limb snapped off in his hands, revealing actual human bone and muscle beneath the painted exterior. The police were immediately called, and a medical examiner soon confirmed the impossible. The prop was a mummified human body. The origins of this bizarre funhouse fixture trace back to 1911. The body belonged to Elmer McCurdy, an unsuccessful train robber who died during a shootout with police in Oklahoma. When nobody claimed his remains, the local undertaker preserved his body with arsenic and propped him up in the corner of the funeral home, charging locals a nickel to see the outlaw. Eventually, traveling carnival promoters tricked the undertaker into handing over the remains. For the next 60 years, McCurdy's mummified body toured the country. He was sold from one sideshow to another, eventually losing his true identity. Over decades of being painted, dropped, and hung in various haunted houses, people simply forgot he was a real person, assuming he was just a highly detailed wax dummy. After the shocking discovery on the television set, the mystery was finally solved. Elmer McCurdy was given a proper burial, ending a bizarre 6-decade journey hidden in plain sight among the fake horrors of the American carnival circuit. Home Intruder poses as a clown statue. The quiet security of a suburban home was shattered in 2006 when a babysitter in Southern California encountered a mystery that began as a strange decoration and ended as a documented police emergency. The evening followed a standard, logical progression. The parents had departed for dinner, leaving the teenager in charge of their children. After settling the kids into their upstairs bedrooms, the babysitter moved to the living room, only to be immediately unnerved by a life-sized clown statue standing in the corner of the room. The figure was extremely detailed, dressed in a full costume with a painted, unmoving face. Feeling an instinctive sense of dread, the sitter tried to ignore the object, but the feeling of being watched became unbearable. She eventually telephoned the father to ask for permission to cover the statue with a blanket, explaining that it was frightening her. The father's reaction was instantaneous and panicked. He informed her that they did not own a clown statue and instructed her to take the children and leave the house immediately. As the babysitter hung up and looked back toward the corner, the statue was gone. She managed to grab the children and flee to a neighbor's house just as the police arrived to set up a perimeter. A thorough sweep of the property revealed that the intruder had escaped through a back entrance seconds before the authorities reached the scene. This specific incident turned a common campfire story into a terrifying reality. It serves as a grim validation of the legend that a predator can hide in plain sight by mimicking an inanimate object. The case remains a chilling reminder that the most disturbing threats aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they are standing right in the center of the room, waiting for you to look away. The Green Man. In the summer of 1919, an 8-year-old boy named Raymond Robinson climbed a trolley bridge in Pennsylvania to look at a bird's nest. He never saw the active electrical line hidden in the wood. The massive surge of voltage that tore through his body should have killed him instantly. Miraculously, he survived, but the accident left him severely disfigured, taking his eyes, his nose, and one of his arms. Because his appearance terrified people in his neighborhood, Raymond spent his life hiding inside during the daylight hours. But he still craved fresh air. To avoid causing a panic, he began taking long, solitary walks in the dead of night, using a wooden stick to navigate the pitch-black, empty country roads of Route 351. Over the decades, teenagers cruising down those unlit roads at midnight would catch a terrifying glimpse of him in their high beams. Seeing a faceless figure wandering alone in the dark, they didn't see a tragic survivor. They saw a monster. Rumors exploded across western Pennsylvania about the Green Man, a phantom who roamed the highway, his skin crackling with residual electricity and glowing with a toxic hue. The famous green glow people reported was actually just car headlights reflecting off the pale, plaid work shirts Raymond always wore. Raymond Robinson walked those dark roads for years, completely unaware that his quiet midnight strolls had turned him into the star of a regional nightmare. He was never a monster, but a gentleman seeking a brief moment of freedom, unwittingly transforming his own heartbreaking reality into an enduring piece of American folklore. People in the Walls. In September 1941, the Denver Police Department responded to a brutal crime scene at the residence of Philip Peters. The elderly man had been bludgeoned to death in his own home, but the physical evidence presented an impossible scenario. All the doors and windows were completely locked from the inside, leaving investigators with a sealed crime scene and absolutely no trace of an intruder. Following the murder, Peter's widow was moved to a hospital, leaving the house vacant. However, neighbors soon began reporting strange activity. Shadows moved past the empty windows. The scent of cooking drifted from the kitchen, and faint footsteps echoed through the structure at night. The police conducted multiple thorough sweeps of the property. They walked through the empty rooms, checked the closets, and secured the perimeter, but the house always appeared entirely deserted. The haunting reality of the situation was finally exposed in July of 1942. During a routine patrol of the property, a detective heard the distinct click of a lock on the second floor. Rushing upstairs, he witnessed a pair of legs disappearing into a small, seemingly inaccessible trapdoor, leading to the narrow attic space. The police pulled down a frail, unkempt man named Theodore Edward Conies. Conies had broken into the house months earlier to steal food. When Peters caught him, Conies committed the murder and then retreated into the tiny attic space instead of fleeing. For nearly 10 months, he lived silently in the crawl space, creeping down into the house only to eat and use the bathroom while police actively investigated the rooms directly below him. The case of the Denver Spider-Man cemented the terrifying truth behind the legend of the Phantom Intruder. It proved that a house can be perfectly locked from the outside, while a killer lives completely undetected in the very architecture above. The Toxic Lady. On a quiet evening in February 1994, paramedics rushed 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez into the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital in California. She was experiencing severe distress, prompting the medical staff to immediately administer sedatives and begin routine life-saving procedures. A nurse leaned in to draw blood from Gloria's arm, pulling a sample into a syringe. Almost instantly, a bizarre, foul odor resembling strong garlic and ammonia filled the trauma room. The medical team quickly noticed something completely unnatural. The blood drawn into the tube contained strange, floating white crystals. Before anyone could figure out what they were looking at, the attending nurse fainted and slumped to the floor. A second staff member stepped in to help, only to complain of intense dizziness and difficulty breathing before collapsing herself. Within minutes, a third doctor went down, experiencing severe tremors. Panic swept through the hospital as the very people trying to save a patient suddenly became casualties. The hospital declared an internal state of emergency, forcing the evacuation of the entire emergency department into the parking lot. A hazardous materials team arrived to search the trauma room for toxic gas leaks, but they found absolutely nothing wrong with the building. the source of the toxic fumes was Gloria herself. Dozens of hospital workers fell violently ill that night, and several required extended hospitalization. Gloria tragically passed away within hours, leaving behind a terrifying medical mystery. Scientists later proposed a bizarre chemical chain reaction. They believed Gloria had been using an over-the-counter pain relief gel. When combined with the oxygen administered by paramedics, that gel supposedly converted into a highly toxic vaporized gas right inside her veins. To this day, the case remains a frightening medical anomaly, forever cementing her tragic legacy as the toxic lady. The Phrogger. Coming home to an empty house is supposed to bring a sense of absolute security. But in the spring of 2008, a man in Fukuoka, Japan, discovered that his private sanctuary had been secretly shared for months. He lived entirely alone, yet he began noticing subtle, unsettling changes. Food was vanishing from his refrigerator, and objects were occasionally shifted from their usual resting spots. Believing he might be losing his memory or falling victim to a highly cautious burglar, he decided to set up a hidden security camera linked to his mobile phone to monitor the kitchen while he was at work. The footage he captured did not show an intruder breaking through a window or picking a lock. Instead, it revealed a stranger already inside the house. A woman casually stepped into the kitchen, selected some food, and then moved out of the frame. The police were immediately dispatched to search the supposedly secure home. They checked the doors and windows, finding absolutely no signs of forced entry. The search eventually led them to a small, built-in closet meant for storing futons. Tucked away on the top shelf, in a space barely large enough to fit a human, they found a 58-year-old woman. She had moved a thin mattress and several plastic water bottles into the tiny compartment, living there completely undetected for nearly a year. This incident perfectly illustrates the terrifying reality of frogging, the act of secretly cohabitating in another person's home. It transforms a common urban legend into a documented fact, proving that sometimes the feeling of being watched in an empty room is not just paranoia, but a silent occupant hiding just behind a thin wooden door. The babysitter and the man upstairs. At exactly 10:15 p.m. on a quiet Saturday, a local police dispatcher received a panicked call from a teenage babysitter. She was watching 3 children in a sprawling 2-story suburban home when the evening took a dark turn. The landline phone in the kitchen rang, but the caller on the other end said nothing. They simply breathed heavily into the receiver before hanging up. Minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, a flat, muffled voice issued a single chilling demand, instructing the teenager to check on the children upstairs. Assuming it was a cruel prank by someone in the neighborhood, the babysitter checked the locks on the ground floor doors and returned to the living room couch. The calls, however, did not stop. They escalated rapidly in frequency, and the stranger began describing exactly what the babysitter was doing and what she was wearing. Absolute panic set in. She dialed the emergency operator, begging for an officer to be dispatched. The police instructed her to keep the stalker on the line during the next call so they could run a manual trace on the signal's origin. When the phone rang for the final time, she forced herself to listen to the stalker for a grueling 60 seconds. Before she could respond, the emergency operator interrupted the connection with a frantic, overriding command. She was told to drop the phone, leave the house immediately, and wait in the front yard. The authorities had successfully completed the trace. The menacing calls were not coming from a phone booth down the street or a neighboring house. The stalker was calling from the second-floor bedroom extension, standing just feet away from the sleeping children. This legendary incident continues to terrify audiences globally. because it preys on a fundamental vulnerability. It proves that securing the perimeter of a home means absolutely nothing if the danger is already waiting for you at the top of the stairs. The dead body under the mattress. In March 2010, the line between urban legend and reality vanished inside room 222 of the Budget Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. A series of guests checked into the room over the course of several weeks, each paying for a cheap place to sleep. Almost immediately upon entering, these travelers encountered an overwhelming, foul odor. Assuming the stench was just a severe rodent problem or poor hygiene from previous occupants, the guests simply sprayed air freshener, opened the windows, and slept on the bed. The smell persisted and worsened, prompting multiple complaints to the motel management. Cleaners scrubbed the floors and wiped down the surfaces, but the deep, sickening scent remained trapped inside the small room. For weeks, different people continued to rent the room, sleeping mere inches above the source of the terrible odor. The horrific truth was finally uncovered when investigators arrived at the motel, searching for a missing woman named Soni Millbrook. Acting on a tip, they entered room 222 and focused their attention on the bed. They stripped the sheets and lifted the mattress to examine the heavy metal box spring resting on the floor. Hidden completely inside the hollow frame of the box spring was Millbrook's body. The realization that dozens of people had unknowingly slept directly on top of a decomposing body turned a classic myth into a documented police case. It confirmed the darkest fears of every traveler. The incident serves as a grim warning that the most disturbing threats in an unfamiliar room are not always hiding in the closet or outside the window, but right beneath the mattress. Cropsey. In the summer of 1987, the disappearance of a young girl on Staten Island forced local police to confront a terrifying reality. The community's most famous urban legend was actually a living, breathing predator. For decades, children in the area had passed around the story of Cropsey, a maniac who supposedly lived in the abandoned tunnel system beneath the Willowbrook State School and hunted anyone who wandered too close to the tree line. The sprawling institution had been shut down years earlier due to horrific neglect, leaving behind dozens of decaying buildings surrounded by dense woods. It was the perfect setting for a local ghost story. But when multiple children vanished from the surrounding neighborhoods over a span of several years, investigators began conducting massive search grids through the overgrown property. The searchers did not find a phantom. Instead, they discovered a series of makeshift campsites hidden deep in the foliage. The camps belonged to a drifter named Andre Rand, a former orderly who had actually worked at Willowbrook before it was shuttered. Instead of leaving when the facility closed, Rand had moved into the surrounding woods, physically inhabiting the exact locations where the mythical Cropsey was said to hide. Police soon uncovered shallow graves near his encampments, directly linking the former hospital worker to the missing children. Rand was ultimately convicted of kidnapping, providing a permanent, human face to the faceless boogeyman. The Cropsey case remains one of the most unsettling true crime investigations in history because it erased the line between folklore and reality. It proved that the monsters parents warn their children about are sometimes real people living right at the edge of town. The Bunnyman. On the evening of October 19th, 1970, a young couple parked their car near a desolate bridge in Fairfax County, Virginia, expecting a quiet night. Their isolation was violently interrupted when a man dressed in a white bunny suit emerged from the darkness and hurled a hatchet through their passenger window. This bizarre and terrifying assault was not an exaggerated rumor, but the documented police case that sparked the Bunnyman legend. the attacker vanished into the surrounding woods, leaving the couple terrified but physically unharmed. Just 10 days later, the costume figure struck again a few blocks away. A security guard patrolling a developing subdivision discovered a man in a full bunny suit standing on the porch of an unfinished house. The figure was actively chopping at a wooden roof support with a long-handled axe. When confronted, the man verbally threatened the guard, stating he would chop his head off for trespassing before slipping away into the night. These twin incidents triggered a massive official response from the Fairfax County Police. Investigators took the reports completely seriously, launching extensive searches of the woods and interviewing dozens of residents. Despite their efforts, the hatchet-wielding man was never identified or captured. Over the decades, the unsolved investigation morphed into a sprawling urban legend. The site of the first attack, a concrete tunnel known as the Colchester Overpass, was officially dubbed Bunny Man Bridge by locals. The story eventually grew to include a fictional backstory involving an early 20th century asylum escapee, blending historical fears of runaway inmates with the verified 1970 police reports. The Bunny Man endures as a terrifying piece of modern folklore because beneath the layers of campfire exaggeration lies a very real, documented series of attacks by an unidentified man holding an axe in the dark. The hook. Imagine parking your car on a secluded dirt road in the spring of 1946, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening away from the watchful eyes of town. For the teenagers of Texarkana, these isolated areas were the perfect escape. But that spring, those dark tree lines transformed into the hunting grounds of an unidentified predator known as the Phantom Killer, paralyzing the region with absolute terror. Over the course of several weeks, this hooded figure brutally attacked 8 people who had simply parked their vehicles in the dark. As local police scrambled to patrol the backwoods, panic gripped the community. Teenagers were placed under strict curfews, hardware stores sold out of locks, and families armed themselves before the sun went down. By May, the killer vanished without a trace, leaving the investigation permanently unsolved and inflicting a deep psychological scar on the country. From the very real bloodshed of the Texarkana murders, a specific, chilling story began to spread from town to town, eventually becoming a massive piece of modern folklore. The legend always features a young couple parked in a remote area, listening to the radio. An emergency broadcast suddenly interrupts the music, warning of an escaped patient armed with a hook for a right hand. The terrified passenger begs to leave, but the driver hesitates until a sharp scraping sound echoes against the side of the car. They speed away in a panic, safely reaching home, only to discover a bloody steel hook dangling from the exterior door handle. The legend of the hook endures because it is rooted in documented historical fact. It serves as a permanent, cautionary tale born from a very real, uncaught predator, forcing every generation to remember that the romantic isolation of a dark country road is rarely as safe as it seems. Gateway of the Mind. Imagine a group of scientists in the early 1980s conducting a radical, undocumented sensory deprivation experiment. They believed that the 5 human senses hindered the mind's ability to connect with the divine. To test this theory, they selected an elderly volunteer who had nothing left to lose. The researchers surgically severed every sensory connection in the man's head. He was rendered completely blind, deaf, and unable to taste, smell, or feel anything. With no way to perceive the physical world, the subject was left alone with only his own thoughts. For the first few days, he simply spoke aloud about his mental state. Soon, his dialogue shifted to terrifying claims. He reported hearing the voices of the deceased echoing in his head. The scientists dismissed this as a predictable hallucination caused by extreme isolation. The situation rapidly deteriorated. The subject began screaming in absolute agony, clawing at his own unfeeling face and begging to be sedated. He claimed the voices in his mind had become deafening and hostile, revealing unfathomable secrets about the afterlife. The researchers continued to observe him, desperate for a breakthrough. Before they could finally intervene and terminate the study, the man bit off his own tongue and eventually died from his self-inflicted injuries. He left behind a final, chilling message scribbled in his own blood, stating he had spoken with the Creator and found him completely insane. This infamous internet legend perfectly preys on the innate human fear of total isolation. It explores the terrifying possibility that our natural senses do not just help us navigate the physical world. They actively protect our minds from whatever exists outside of it. The Expressionless. Late one night in 1972, the sliding glass doors of a Los Angeles emergency room opened to reveal a sight that immediately silenced the waiting area. A woman stood at the entrance wearing a blood-soaked white gown, but her injuries were not the source of the terror. Her face lacked any recognizable human flaw. Her skin was as smooth and pale as a porcelain doll, entirely missing eyebrows and normal blemishes. She possessed the rigid, unnatural stillness of a store mannequin, yet she moved with an eerie, mechanical precision directly toward the front desk. The sheer shock of her appearance escalated into pure panic when the medical staff noticed the object clamped tightly in her jaw. She was holding a violently mangled kitten in her mouth, its blood dripping onto her chest. Without breaking her dead, unblinking stare, she calmly pulled the animal from her teeth, tossed it onto the linoleum floor, and suddenly collapsed. Horrified doctors immediately rushed her to a hospital bed, strapping her down to administer a heavy sedative. As an attending physician leaned in to check her vitals, the woman finally broke her frozen state with a slow smile. Instead of normal human teeth, her mouth was lined with long, razor-sharp metallic spikes. Before the medical team could process the impossible sight, she lunged forward, brutally attacking the doctor. In the ensuing chaos, she calmly stood up, walked out of the hospital into the night, and vanished forever. While this chilling sequence is frequently shared across online forums as a suppressed historical event, it is actually a masterful piece of modern internet fiction. The deeply unsettling photograph that always accompanies the story is simply an old archival snapshot of a wax student nurse dummy, proving how easily a single eerie image can birth a terrifying modern myth. The Russian sleep experiment. Deep within a sealed Soviet research facility in the late 1940s, 5 political prisoners were locked inside a secure testing chamber. The scientists overseeing the project offered a simple, irresistible deal. The men would be granted full pardons and immediate freedom if they could remain awake for 30 consecutive days. To keep them conscious, the room was continuously pumped with an experimental airborne stimulant gas. For the first 5 days, the subjects casually discussed their past traumas over the microphones, their behavior closely monitored through thick glass observation windows. The environment was calm, but the psychological strain soon began to manifest. By the 9th day, the fragile peace completely fractured. One captive suddenly began screaming, sprinting back and forth across the chamber for hours until his vocal cords simply tore. The remaining subjects barely reacted to his agony. Instead, they quietly began tearing pages from books, smearing the paper with their own waste, and pasting it over the observation glass. The researchers were left entirely blind to the horrors unfolding inside. After several days of absolute unnerving silence, the scientists finally shut off the stimulant gas and unsealed the heavy steel doors. They discovered a scene of unimaginable violence. The prisoners were severely mutilated, having turned on themselves in a state of hyper-awake psychosis. Even more disturbing, the surviving men aggressively demanded the gas be turned back on, absolutely terrified of the prospect of falling asleep. This gruesome narrative spread rapidly across the web, often presented as a leaked, classified military document. In reality, it is a quintessential internet creepypasta, originally authored for a horror fiction forum. The terrifying photograph constantly linked to the legend is merely a picture of a commercial Halloween prop, demonstrating how a gripping fictional narrative can seamlessly masquerade as a dark historical truth. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a strange, sickly sweet odour drifting through your bedroom window, only to suddenly realise you cannot move your legs. For dozens of families in a small Illinois town, that exact nightmare became a paralysing reality. The local police initially brushed off the first panicked phone call as a bad dream or a sudden illness. But within days, the exact same scenario played out across the entire community. Victims reported smelling a chemical scent, followed immediately by violent nausea, coughing fits, and temporary paralysis in their lower bodies. A terrifying profile quickly emerged of a shadowy figure creeping through backyards. Armed with a modified agricultural sprayer, this phantom attacker was quietly pumping a toxic, paralyzing gas under the doors and through the open windows of sleeping families. Panic completely consumed the tight-knit town. Armed citizens formed civilian patrols, roaming the dark streets with shotguns to hunt down the rogue chemist. State law enforcement descended on the neighborhoods, fully expecting to capture a deranged serial attacker. Instead, they found absolutely nothing. There were no footprints beneath the targeted windows, no discarded chemical canisters, and no physical residue left on the sills. As abruptly as the terrifying attacks began, they completely stopped. Today, the Mattoon incident is studied as one of the most extreme cases of mass psychogenic illness. The heavy anxiety of the era, fueled by sensationalized newspaper headlines, caused the town's collective fear to manifest as genuine physical paralysis. Yet, for the people who lay helplessly frozen in their own beds, the phantom attacker was undeniably real. Loyon. A peaceful hike through a dense, quiet forest shatters the moment you cross paths, with a towering figure wearing a heavy military cloak and a vintage, full-face gas mask. This jarring collision of natural beauty and apocalyptic horror was a terrifying reality for anyone wandering into the Moors forest of Switzerland. For over a decade, locals whispered about a silent wanderer they called Le Loyon. The encounters always followed the exact same eerie pattern. A hiker or family would turn a corner on a remote wooded trail and suddenly freeze. Standing completely still in the distance was a massive person shrouded in dark, heavy clothing, their face hidden entirely behind the dark glass lenses of an antique breathing apparatus. The figure never made a threatening move. He would simply stare at the terrified witnesses for a long, heavy moment before turning his back and disappearing silently into the thick underbrush. The sheer visual terror of these sightings birthed a modern boogeyman. Le Loyon became a localized legend, an unproven ghost story used to keep people out of the deep woods until a hiker finally managed to capture a clear photograph. The image spread rapidly across the globe, proving the Swiss monster was entirely real and sparking a massive public hunt to unmask him. The sudden influx of attention proved to be the end of the legend. Just months after the photograph went viral, authorities discovered the iconic military cloak and gas mask neatly folded and abandoned deep in the trees. Alongside the clothing rested a written message expressing a desperate desire to simply be left alone. The terrifying phantom of the forest was never a monster, but merely an eccentric individual seeking absolute isolation, ultimately driven away by the very fear his disguise created. The Man From Taured. Stepping up to the customs counter at a busy international airport is an entirely routine process. A traveller hands over a passport, receives a stamp, and walks through the security gates. That predictable rhythm permanently shattered when a sharply dressed European businessman handed his documents to a customs officer in Tokyo, instantly triggering an impossible geographical nightmare. The officer examined the passport and found it to be completely authentic. It was made of high-quality materials and filled with legitimate customs stamps from previous travels across the globe. The only problem was the nation that issued it. The cover prominently displayed the name Taured. When airport officials informed the man that his homeland did not exist on any map, he became visibly frustrated. He confidently pointed to a spot nestled perfectly between France and Spain, insisting his country had stood there for over 1,000 years. To prove his identity, he produced bank statements, a driver's license, and corporate business cards, all bearing the insignia of a phantom nation. Baffled authorities decided to detain the mysterious traveller overnight in a local high-rise hotel while they investigated further. 2 armed guards were stationed directly outside his single door. The room itself sat several stories above a busy street, completely lacking a balcony or an accessible window ledge. When officials unlocked the door the following morning, the room was entirely empty. The traveller, along with his impossible passport and every piece of supporting documentation, had vanished without a single trace. While modern researchers believe the story is a highly exaggerated account of a real historical fraudster, the legend endures as the ultimate parallel universe theory. It plays on the deeply unsettling idea of slipping into a reality where your entire existence has simply been erased. The Moberly Incident. Getting lost on a sightseeing tour is usually a minor inconvenience, easily solved by pulling out a map or asking a passing local for directions. That temporary confusion transforms into a profound psychological terror when you realize the map in your hands no longer matches the century you are standing in. 2 highly educated academics were simply enjoying a leisurely stroll through the sprawling gardens of the Palace of Versailles, searching for a specific historical chateau. As they wandered away from the main tourist paths, a heavy, oppressive stillness descended over the manicured landscape. The gentle breeze died completely, and the surrounding trees appeared strangely flat and lifeless, resembling a painted theatrical backdrop rather than a vibrant forest. The environment grew even more unsettling as they crossed paths with individuals who seemed entirely out of place for a modern afternoon. They walked past guards dressed in antiquated green uniforms and a man with a deeply scarred face wrapped in a heavy, archaic cloak. Further down the dirt path, a woman in a flowing 18th century dress sat sketching on the grass, bearing a striking resemblance to the long-dead Queen Marie Antoinette. The 2 women felt an overwhelming, unnatural dread, rushing forward until the heavy atmosphere abruptly shattered, and the bustling noise of modern tourists instantly returned. Convinced they had experienced a genuine tear in reality, the women spent years poring over the historical archives of the French estate. They ultimately discovered that the specific landmarks, uniforms, and obscure footbridges they witnessed exactly matched the layout of Versailles from the late 1700s, detailing structures that had long since been destroyed. Their published account remains one of the most fiercely debated legends of stepping blindly through a dimensional gap. The Philadelphia experiment, a massive steel warship melting into a thick green fog in front of hundreds of onlookers, is the kind of magic trick that belongs in a movie, not a heavily guarded naval shipyard. Yet, that impossible vanishing act is exactly what supposedly happened to the USS Eldridge during a classified military test. The goal of the project was highly ambitious: to render a naval destroyer completely invisible to enemy radar using powerful energy fields. As the massive generators aboard the ship powered up, the air around the hull began to crackle and hum. Observers on nearby vessels watched in absolute disbelief as a dense, glowing green mist swallowed the Eldridge. When the unnatural fog finally dissipated, the thousands of tons of steel and the entire crew had simply ceased to exist in the water. The narrative claims the ship did not just vanish from radar, but physically teleported over 200 miles away to a naval base in Virginia, only to materialize back in its original port minutes later. While the technological feat sounds miraculous, the human cost was pure nightmare. When boarding parties finally breached the return vessel, they discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. The violent sudden jump through space and time had completely scrambled physical matter. Crewmen were found horribly burned, completely stripped of their sanity, or worst of all, physically fused into the solid steel bulkheads of the ship itself. Their bodies were permanently trapped halfway inside the thick metal deck, still alive, but merged with the vessel. While authorities have continuously denied the event, blaming the rumours on a misunderstanding of routine magnetic compass adjustments, the story refuses to fade. It endures as a terrifying cautionary tale about the horrific consequences of bending the fundamental laws of reality. The Ourang Medan, a frantic, fragmented distress signal echoing across the radio frequencies of the open ocean, is enough to chill the blood of any experienced sailor. The desperate tapping of Morse code from a Dutch freighter named the Ourang Medan painted a scene of absolute immediate catastrophe. The transmission stated that all officers, including the captain, were dead in the chart room and on the bridge. A final sequence of code followed moments later, indicating the sender had also just perished before the radio fell completely silent. Several nearby vessels immediately raced toward the coordinates in the Strait of Malacca. An American ship called the Silver Star arrived first, finding the massive freighter drifting quietly in the water, entirely undamaged from the outside. When a cautiously assembled boarding party climbed onto the deck to investigate, they stepped into a frozen nightmare. Every single member of the crew was dead. There were no signs of a physical struggle, no weapons drawn, and no structural damage to the vessel. Even the ship's dog was found lifeless on the deck. The truly horrifying detail was the posture of the bodies. Every corpse was locked in the exact same terrifying position. Their faces were turned upward toward the sky, their eyes bulging, and their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. Their arms were extended out in front of them, seemingly trying to fend off an invisible, overwhelming threat. Before the rescue team could secure a tow line to bring the ghost ship into port, a fire mysteriously ignited deep within the lower cargo hold. The boarding party evacuated just moments before the Ourang Medan violently exploded and sank to the bottom of the ocean, permanently burying the truth. Theories range from a massive leak of highly illegal lethal nerve gas to a catastrophic encounter with something entirely unexplainable. Dyatlov Pass Incident, a howling mountain blizzard naturally forces any rational person to seek warmth and shelter. Willingly slicing open a heavy canvas tent and fleeing into the freezing darkness of a Russian winter without a coat, a flashlight, or even a pair of boots defies every basic human survival instinct. Yet, that is exactly what 9 highly experienced hikers did on the frozen slopes of the Ural Mountains. The group had set up a perfectly normal, secure campsite to wait out the heavy snow. When search parties finally located the missing expedition weeks later, they found the tent partially collapsed and completely abandoned. The heavy canvas had been desperately slashed open from the inside out, indicating a frantic need to escape an immediate, overwhelming threat inside the shelter. Following a trail of bare footprints leading down the mountain toward a nearby tree line, investigators stepped into a deeply disturbing mystery. The hikers had perished in the sub-zero temperatures, but hypothermia was only part of the horrifying truth. Several of the bodies displayed severe, crushing internal chest and skull injuries, similar to the trauma of a high-speed car crash, yet they had absolutely no external bruises or defensive wounds. Further analysis of their clothing revealed highly abnormal levels of radiation. Even more unsettling, some of the victims were found in bizarre states of undress, missing their eyes and a tongue. The Soviet government quickly classified the case files, blaming the deaths on an unknown compelling natural force before abruptly closing the area to the public. While modern scientists point to a rare delayed slab avalanche as the most logical culprit, the bizarre state of the bodies keeps the legend alive. It remains a steady, chilling reminder of the terrifying, unseen dangers hiding in the most isolated corners of the world. Night marchers. A steady rhythmic pounding echoing through a dense island valley long after sunset signals a threat far more dangerous than a changing tide. For generations across the Hawaiian Islands, locals have known exactly what to do when the distant sound of heavy drums and the piercing blow of a conch shell disrupt the quiet night air. They immediately turn off their lights, close their blinds, and stay absolutely silent. The approaching procession belongs to the Night Marchers, a phantom army of ancient warriors eternally bound to protect the sacred paths of the islands. Long before modern roads paved the landscape, these fiercely loyal guards escorted high-ranking chiefs to ancient battlegrounds and holy sites. Their duty did not end with their physical death. Dressed in traditional battle armor and carrying blazing torches that seem to burn even in the heaviest rain, these spectral guardians continue their endless patrol under the cover of darkness. A sudden, heavy smell of sulfur and the distinct rustle of marching feet through the jungle brush means the procession is terrifyingly close. Crossing paths with this phantom army is considered a fatal mistake. According to deep-rooted local folklore, a mortal who makes direct eye contact with the marchers will be immediately struck dead, their soul forced to march alongside the warriors for eternity. The only chance of survival when caught directly on their path is to strip bare, press your body face down into the dirt, and play completely dead. By showing absolute, unwavering submission, a terrifying fate is bypassed, allowing the ghostly ranks to pass by without incident. The legend endures not just as a spooky island tale, but as a deeply ingrained cultural warning to always show profound respect to the land and the ancient spirits that still fiercely guard it. The Black Mountain. Stepping onto a solid mountain trail usually guarantees a clear, predictable path to the summit. That comforting illusion vanishes completely when the entire landscape is actually a massive, unstable pile of giant black boulders hiding a bottomless subterranean labyrinth. In Queensland, Australia, an unnatural geological formation rises abruptly from the lush surrounding rainforest. Known locally as Kalkajaka, or the Mountain of Death. This imposing structure contains no dirt, no trees, and absolutely no solid ground. It is simply a colossal heap of blackened granite blocks, some the size of houses, resting precariously on top of each other. The spaces between these massive rocks create a sprawling, pitch-black maze of deep crevices and sheer drops that completely swallow the sunlight. The terrifying reputation of the mountain goes far beyond its eerie appearance. For over a century, documented reports detail people, horses, and entire herds of cattle wandering into the dark gaps between the boulders and simply vanishing forever. Tracking a lost hiker into the rocks is considered a fatal mistake. The internal cave system violently shifts as the massive boulders settle over time, creating sudden dead ends and vertical plunges that drop hundreds of feet into absolute darkness. Search parties attempting to rescue missing travelers frequently become victims themselves. The jagged granite heavily distorts sound, making it impossible to accurately locate distant cries for help. Furthermore, the heavy magnetic properties of the rocks render navigation equipment entirely useless. There is no hidden supernatural monster hunting inside the mountain. The landscape itself is the predator, acting as a massive, naturally occurring trap that quietly consumes anyone foolish enough to step away from the safe edges of the rainforest and into the crushing shadows. Devil's Tower, a massive, flat-topped monolith rising abruptly out of the rolling Wyoming plains, looks less like a mountain and more like the colossal stump of an ancient petrified tree. The sheer, vertical walls of Devil's Tower are completely covered in deep, parallel gouges that stretch hundreds of feet into the sky. Standing at the base and looking up at those massive stone pillars instantly triggers a deeply unsettling feeling that this structure was not formed by slow geological shifts, but violently carved by something impossibly large. For generations, local Native American tribes shared a terrifying account of the tower's creation. The narrative describes a group of young girls being relentlessly hunted across the plains by a monstrous, oversized bear. In a desperate attempt to save them, the ground beneath their feet suddenly thrust violently upward, lifting the girls high out of reach. The furious beast repeatedly reared up and slammed its massive claws into the sides of the rising rock, desperately trying to climb, leaving behind the deep vertical grooves that still permanently scar the monument today. The chilling atmosphere of the tower extends far beyond ancient folklore. Modern visitors and park rangers frequently report bizarre phenomena surrounding the isolated rock. Electronic devices inexplicably fail, navigation equipment spins wildly out of control near the base, and a low, vibrating hum often echoes through the surrounding pine forests at night. The perfectly flat, acre-sized summit is completely inaccessible without advanced climbing gear, yet strange. Glowing lights are routinely spotted hovering silently directly above the plateau. Whether viewed as the battleground of a mythical beast or a powerful magnetic anomaly drawing unexplained aerial activity, the towering stone structure refuses to be easily categorized. It stands as a massive, brooding monument to the unknown, quietly dominating the landscape and demanding absolute respect from anyone who walks into its heavy shadow. The Mothman, driving down a lonely road at night, the last thing you expect to see in your rearview mirror is a pair of glowing red eyes keeping pace with your car at 80 miles per hour. This wasn't just a trick of the light for the residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. In the mid-60s, a quiet industrial town became the hunting ground for a creature that defied every known law of biology. The sightings began in an abandoned explosives manufacturing facility known as the TNT area. Two young couples were driving past the rusted bunkers when they spotted a towering man-shaped figure standing over 6 feet tall. It didn't have a head. Instead, two massive, hypnotic red eyes were set directly into its chest. As they panicked and sped away, the creature unfurled a 10-foot wingspan and took flight, gliding effortlessly behind their vehicle without ever flapping its wings. For a full year, the town was gripped by a collective fever. More than 100 people reported the same terrifying entity lurking in the shadows of the forest or perched on top of local buildings. The atmosphere in Point Pleasant grew heavy with a sense of impending doom, as if the creature wasn't there to hunt, but to signal a coming catastrophe. People reported bizarre phone interference, strange lights in the sky, and visits from mysterious men in dark suits who warned them to stop talking. The legend reached its tragic climax on a freezing December evening. The Silver Bridge, a major artery connecting the town to Ohio, suddenly collapsed into the Ohio River, claiming 46 lives. As the dust settled, the sightings of the winged figure stopped instantly. To this day, the debate continues. Was the Mothman a predatory monster or a terrifying omen trying to warn a community of its darkest hour before vanishing back into the void? The Jersey Devil, a dense, million-acre expanse of pitch-black pines in southern New Jersey, hides a history far darker than the twisted trees themselves. Most forests are home to deer and foxes, but the Pine Barrens have been defined for 3 centuries by a single, impossible creature that sounds like a patchwork of nightmares. The story begins in the winter of 1735 with a woman known as Mother Leeds. Local law suggests that upon discovering she was pregnant with her 13th child, she cursed the unborn infant out of sheer exhaustion and despair. On a dark and stormy night, the child was born appearing perfectly normal, but within moments, it underwent a horrific transformation. It grew a horse-like head, massive leathery wings, cloven hooves, and a long forked tail. With a blood-curdling screech that reportedly silenced the surrounding woods, the creature attacked the room and flew up the chimney, disappearing into the swamp. This was not just a one-time ghost story used to scare children. In January of 1909, a wave of mass hysteria gripped the entire state of New Jersey as thousands of people reported seeing the creature. For an entire week, schools were closed and factories were shut down because workers were too terrified to leave their homes. Witnesses described a beast that could leap over high fences and survive direct gunfire, leaving behind strange cloven footprints that led across rooftops and stopped abruptly in the middle of open fields. While skeptics argue the legend was born from political rivalries or misidentified local wildlife, the consistent descriptions of a high-pitched, piercing scream continue to echo through the pines. The Jersey Devil remains a permanent fixture of the landscape, serving as a chilling reminder that some regional nightmares are too deeply rooted in the soil to ever truly disappear. The Flatwood Monster, a bright, pulsing object streaking across the evening sky, is usually a cause for excitement until it slows down and settles silently into the dark woods of a nearby hilltop. On a September evening in 1952, a group of local boys and a mother in Flatwoods, West Virginia, decided to investigate a glowing red light they believed was a fallen meteor. What they discovered at the top of the ridge was not a piece of space rock, but a towering entity that defied every earthly explanation. The group's flashlight beam cut through a thick, pungent mist that smelled of burnt metal and sulfur. Resting in the tall grass was a massive, pulsating ball of fire. Just beyond it, the light caught a 10-foot-tall figure standing near an oak tree. The creature possessed a blood-red face and eyes that emitted a greenish-orange glow. Most terrifying of all was its shape. It appeared to be wearing a dark, pointed cowl shaped like the ace of spades, and its lower body was encased in a metallic pleated skirt. As the creature emitted a shrill hissing sound and began to glide toward them, the group fled in absolute terror. The physical evidence left behind was impossible to ignore. Several members of the party fell violently ill with throat irritation and nausea, symptoms now associated with exposure to toxic mustard gas. Local authorities arrived to find elongated skid marks in the dirt and a strange, oily residue coating the grass where the figure had stood. While some investigators later claimed the group had simply been startled by a startled barn owl perched on a branch, the consistency of the witnesses' trauma suggests a much darker encounter. The Flatwood Monster remains a cornerstone of Appalachian history, a chilling reminder of a night when the boundary between our world and the unknown completely dissolved on a quiet country hillside. Monkey Man of Delhi. A summer heatwave in a city of millions usually brings a restless silence to the streets at night, but in May of 2001, the residents of New Delhi were paralyzed by a very different kind of tension. People began sleeping on their rooftops to escape the stifling indoor air, only to find themselves completely vulnerable to a shadow moving across the skyline with impossible speed. The panic started with a few isolated reports of a strange, 4-foot-tall creature that looked like a grotesque hybrid of a man and a monkey. It didn't just climb, it leapt across vast gaps between apartment buildings, appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Witnesses described a figure with glowing red eyes and metallic claws that could slash through clothing and skin with ease. Some victims even swore the creature wore a helmet and had a chest plate with flashing blue lights, making it look more like a rogue piece of technology than a wild animal. Within days, the sightings transformed into a full-blown crisis. Hospital emergency rooms were flooded with people sporting deep scratches and bite marks. The fear grew so intense that neighborhood watch groups formed on every corner, armed with sticks and flashlights, scouring the darkness for any sign of the beast. In the chaos of the nightly patrols, several people were tragically injured or killed, not by the creature itself, but by the sheer, unbridled panic of a city convinced it was under siege. By the end of the month, as mysteriously as the attacks had begun, the Monkey Man simply vanished. No creature was ever captured, and no physical evidence like fur or footprints was ever recovered. Psychologists eventually pointed to a massive case of collective delusion triggered by the extreme heat and power outages. Yet, for those who spent those weeks in the dark, the metallic screech of claws on a rooftop remains a sound they can never forget. Black-eyed kids. A late-night knock on your front door is usually nothing more than a minor annoyance or a neighbor in need of help. That routine encounter becomes a source of deep, instinctual dread when you look through the peephole and see two children standing perfectly still under the porch light. They aren't shivering or asking for a phone. They are simply waiting with an intensity that feels entirely wrong for their age. This phenomenon, known as the black-eyed kids, began surfacing in the late 90s and follows a chillingly consistent pattern. The children, usually between the ages of 6 and 16, appear in pairs wearing outdated or oddly bland clothing. They approach people in parking lots or at their doorsteps, speaking in a flat, monotone voice. Their request is always the same. They need to come inside your house or your car. They might claim they are lost, hungry, or need to call their mother, but they will never cross the threshold without an explicit invitation. The moment you engage with them, a wave of overwhelming panic usually takes hold. It is a physical sensation of being in the presence of a predator. As you look closer, the source of the unease becomes clear. Their eyes are not just dark, they are solid obsidian orbs. There is no white sclera, no coloured iris, and no pupil. Just two bottomless pits of black reflecting nothing back at you. Those who have encountered them report that the children become increasingly insistent, their voices dropping in pitch as they repeat that they cannot come in unless you say it is okay. To this day, there are no documented accounts of what happens to those who actually open the door. The legend thrives on that silence, serving as a terrifying reminder to trust the primal instinct that tells you some visitors should never be invited in. Humans can lick too. The storm eventually passed, replaced by the persistent rhythmic sound of a dripping faucet somewhere in the house. Unable to ignore the noise, the girl finally climbed out of bed to investigate. She checked the bathroom, then the kitchen, but every tap was dry. The sound seemed to be coming from deep inside her bedroom closet. When she pulled the closet door open, the girl didn't find a leaking pipe. She found her dog, cold and lifeless, hanging from the clothes rack. The dripping sound wasn't water, but blood hitting the floorboards. In a state of absolute shock, she turned back toward her bed and noticed a scrap of paper tucked under her pillow. On it, a jagged handwritten message revealed the most terrifying truth of the night. Humans can lick too. This story has circulated for decades as one of the most effective urban legends in modern history. It preys on our most basic vulnerabilities, the trust we place in our pets, and the false sense of security we feel in our own bedrooms. While there is no specific police report tied to a single origin, the tale persists because it highlights a chilling reality. The things that make us feel the safest can be used as a disguise for the things we should fear the most. The silent twins. Growing up with a sibling often involves a private language or a secret bond, but for June and Jennifer Gibbons, that connection became a self-imposed prison. Born in the early 60s, the sisters eventually stopped communicating with the outside world entirely, retreating into a shared silence that baffled doctors, teachers, and even their own parents. They weren't physically unable to speak. They simply chose to exist in a reality that only the two of them were allowed to inhabit. Their synchronization was eerie and absolute. When they walked, their footsteps landed at the exact same millisecond. If one sat down or reached for a glass of water, the other mirrored the movement perfectly, as if they were two bodies controlled by a single mind. Within the walls of their bedroom, they lived a double life, writing thousands of words of intense, dark fiction and recording long, complex plays on cassette tapes. Yet, the moment anyone else entered the room, they became as rigid and silent as statues. As they reached adulthood, this isolation turned destructive. Following a series of crimes that landed them in a high-security psychiatric hospital for over a decade, the twins reached a chilling conclusion. They believed that as long as they both lived, neither could ever be truly free or normal. They reportedly made a pact. One of them had to die so the other could finally live a life of her own. Shortly after being transferred to a lower security facility, Jennifer suddenly passed away from a rare heart condition that doctors could not fully explain. She had no previous history of heart disease and no drugs were in her system. Following the tragedy, June began to speak to others for the first time in years, claiming that Jennifer had laid down her life for her. It remains one of the most haunting examples of how a bond meant for support can transform into a dark, inexplicable mystery. The boy in the box. Finding a discarded cardboard box on the side of a quiet road rarely warrants a second glance, but in the winter of 1957, one such box became the center of a mystery that would haunt a city for over 60 years. A young man, hunting for muskrats in a wooded area of Philadelphia, pushed aside some brush and stumbled upon a large shipping container for a baby's bassinet. When he looked inside, he didn't find old furniture. He found the small, lifeless body of a young boy carefully wrapped in a cheap flannel blanket. The discovery immediately triggered one of the largest investigations in the city's history. The child was estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, but he was severely malnourished, and his hair had been recently and very clumsily shorn off. Despite the boy's face being plastered on thousands of posters across the country and his fingerprints being sent to every major agency, no one came forward to claim him. He became known simply as America's unknown child, a boy who seemed to have existed entirely off the grid. For decades, the case felt like a dead end. Every lead proved to be a ghost, and every theory, from a local foster home to a secretive family, eventually fell apart. The chilling reality was that a child could live, suffer, and vanish without a single person in the world reporting him missing. The silence finally broke in late 2022. Using modern forensic genealogy, investigators successfully identified the boy as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. While the discovery provided a name and a family tree, the circumstances of his short life and tragic end remain a dark, unsolved chapter. The box in the woods serves as a somber reminder of a time when the world was much larger and a small life could be forgotten in the shadows of a growing city. The Watcher of Westfield. Buying your dream home is supposed to be the crowning achievement of a lifetime, but for one family in Westfield, New Jersey, that milestone quickly transformed into a living nightmare. Shortly after closing on a beautiful 6-bedroom colonial mansion, the new owners received a handwritten envelope in their mailbox that would ensure they never spent a single night inside. The letter was not a standard welcome from a neighbour. Instead, the writer claimed that the house had been the subject of their family's obsession for decades, passing from their grandfather to their father, and now to them. They identified themselves only as the Watcher. The text was filled with deeply personal details that should have been impossible for a stranger to know, including the nicknames of the family's children and the specific order in which they played in the yard. As more letters arrived, the tone shifted from observation to a quiet, looming threat. The writer began asking if the family had found what was hidden in the walls yet, and expressed a dark curiosity about the young blood moving into the home. Every window of the house started to feel like an eye looking back at the family. Private investigators and local police were brought in, but they were met with a wall of silence. No DNA was found on the envelopes, no fingerprints were left behind, and the high-end security cameras installed around the perimeter never caught a single person approaching the mailbox. The mystery was never solved. The family was eventually forced to sell the house at a massive loss, having never moved in out of fear for their lives. To this day, the identity of the person who spent years peering through the curtains remains unknown. It stands as a chilling reminder that your most private sanctuary can be compromised by a stranger who knows your secrets better than you do. HinterKaifeck Murders. Finding a set of fresh footprints in the snow that lead directly toward your house is unsettling, but noticing that those same footprints never lead back out is the stuff of pure nightmare. This was the chilling reality for Andreas Gruber, a farmer living on the isolated HinterKaifeck farmstead in rural Bavaria. Days before his entire family would meet a gruesome end, he discovered tracks in the deep winter snow, beginning at the edge of the forest and ending at his own back door. The strangeness did not stop there. The family began hearing heavy footsteps echoing from the attic and found newspapers in the kitchen that they had never purchased. Keys went missing, and the locks on their doors showed signs of being tampered with. Despite these clear warnings, the family remained in the house, unaware that a predator was effectively living among them, hidden in the shadows of their own home. The true horror was discovered several days later when concerned neighbors checked on the farm. In the barn, they found 4 bodies stacked neatly beneath a layer of hay, while 2 more victims were discovered inside the house. Every person had been killed with a heavy pickaxe. Even more disturbing was the evidence found by investigators. The killer had stayed on the farm for several days after the murders. Smoke had been seen rising from the chimney. The cattle had been fed, and someone had recently eaten a meal in the kitchen while the victims lay just a few yards away. Despite interviewing over 100 suspects, the case was never solved. The farm was eventually demolished, but the mystery remains a cornerstone of true crime history. It serves as a haunting reminder that the most dangerous place on earth can be your own home, when the person watching you has already found a way inside. Skeleton in a tree. Climbing to the highest branches of an ancient tree is usually an act of youthful adventure, but for a group of children playing in the woods of West Virginia, it led to a discovery that would haunt their community for decades. While looking up into the dense canopy of an old, hollowed-out chestnut tree, they didn't see birds or squirrels. Instead, peering back down through a narrow crack in the trunk was a bleached human skull. When investigators arrived and began to carefully dismantle the tree, they realized they weren't just looking at a stray bone. Standing upright inside the hollow center of the trunk was a full human skeleton, perfectly preserved and encased by the growing wood. The body belonged to a man who had vanished years earlier, but the way he was positioned suggested a terrifying and slow end. He wasn't placed there after his death. He had entered the tree while he was still very much alive. The logical progression of the tragedy soon became clear. The man had likely been hunting or exploring when he climbed the tree and accidentally slipped into the narrow, hollow core. Because the opening was tapered like a funnel, he became wedged tight, his arms pinned to his sides and his feet dangling just inches above the ground. He was trapped in a natural wooden coffin, hidden from view and muffled by the thick bark. For days, he would have been able to hear the sounds of the forest and perhaps even the voices of search parties passing just a few feet away, yet he remained completely invisible. As the years passed, the tree continued to grow, slowly tightening its grip and sealing the secret behind layers of new wood. The legend serves as a visceral reminder of how a simple accident in the great outdoors can transform a living landscape into a silent, inescapable tomb. Doll that grows human hair, a toy sitting quietly on a shelf, is supposed to be a static object of comfort, a frozen memory of childhood that never changes. That sense of innocence shatters the moment you realize the hair on your favorite doll is several inches longer than it was the year before. While it sounds like a plot from a horror movie, this is the daily reality for the monks at a temple in Iwamizawa, Japan, who serve as the caretakers for a doll named Okiku. The story began in 1918, when a young boy purchased a traditional doll with a simple bobbed haircut as a gift for his little sister. The girl cherished the toy, but tragically passed away shortly after. Her grieving family placed the doll on a small altar in her memory, and that is when the impossible began to happen. They noticed that the short, cropped hair of the doll was beginning to grow. Over the following months, the jet black strands reached down past the doll's shoulders, despite no one having touched or altered the toy. When the family eventually moved, they entrusted the doll to the local temple, where it has remained for nearly a century. The monks there have a strange, routine task. They periodically trim the doll's hair. They claim that no matter how many times they cut it back to the original chin-length style, it always grows back down to the doll's knees. The most unsettling part of the legend is not just the growth itself, but what researchers supposedly found when they examined a few strands under a microscope. The hair didn't have the synthetic texture of a factory-made toy. It possessed the complex cellular structure of a living human child. Whether it is a miraculous spiritual connection or a biological anomaly that science cannot yet explain, the doll continues to sit behind glass, a quiet and growing reminder that some objects refuse to remain inanimate. Hanako-San, the heavy silence of an empty school hallway after the final bell rings, is enough to make any student walk a little faster. But for children in Japan, the real danger isn't in the shadows of the lockers. The true fear lies behind the closed door of the third stall in the third-floor girls' bathroom. This is the home of Hanako-San, a spirit whose presence has been a staple of Japanese school life for decades. The ritual to summon her is simple, yet terrifyingly specific. A student must knock 3 times on the stall door and ask if she is there. If the invitation is accepted, a faint ghostly voice will answer from the darkness, confirming her presence. For those brave enough to push the door open, they are met with the sight of a young girl with a bobbed haircut, wearing a bright red skirt, a remnant of a school uniform from a much older era. The origin of Hanako-San is as varied as the schools she haunts. Some believe she was a student caught in an air raid during World War II, seeking shelter in the bathroom before the building was struck. Others tell a darker story of a child fleeing from a dangerous intruder, only to be cornered in the very stall she now occupies. Regardless of the backstory, her legend has evolved into a rite of passage, a way for students to test their courage against the unknown. While most encounters end with a simple jump scare or a fleeting glimpse of a red skirt, the legend persists because it taps into a universal fear of the mundane becoming monstrous. The bathroom, a place of privacy and vulnerability, becomes a gateway to the afterlife. Hanako-San remains a permanent fixture of the Japanese education system, a silent guardian of the third floor who serves as a chilling reminder that some school secrets never truly graduate. Slit-mouthed woman. Walking home alone on a foggy evening becomes a test of survival the moment a woman wearing a surgical mask steps out from the shadows to block your path. In Japan, this figure is known as Kuchisaki Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman, and she isn't interested in directions or help. She is hunting for a specific answer to a question that has no safe conclusion. The encounter always begins the same way. She will lean in close and ask if you think she is beautiful. If you say yes, she slowly peels back the medical mask to reveal a horrific secret. Her mouth has been sliced open from ear to ear in a jagged, permanent grin, exposing raw muscle and teeth. She then repeats the question in a distorted, guttural voice. The logic of the legend is particularly cruel because your response dictates your fate. Answering no results in an immediate, violent end with a pair of oversized industrial scissors she hides beneath her coat. Answering yes for a second time is even worse. She will use those same scissors to mirror her own disfigured smile onto your face so that you can be beautiful just like her. Trying to run is useless, as she possesses an unnatural speed that allows her to reappear directly in front of you no matter how fast you sprint. Melonheads. Driving through the dense, overgrown backroads of Ohio, Michigan, or Connecticut, you might notice the trees closing in and the streetlights disappearing altogether. In these isolated patches of forest, locals have long whispered about a group of small, pale figures with massive, bulbous heads that lurk just beyond the reach of your headlights. These are the Melonheads, and unlike many monsters that haunt the woods, their legend is rooted in a dark, unsettling history of medical isolation. The most famous version of the story centers on a mysterious figure known as Dr. Crow, who allegedly ran a private asylum deep in the woods during the mid-20th century. The narrative suggests that he took in a group of orphaned children suffering from hydrocephalus, a condition that causes an abnormal accumulation of fluid, leading to an enlarged skull. Instead of providing the care they desperately needed, the legend claims the doctor subjected the children to a series of cruel, experimental treatments that left them physically transformed and deeply traumatized. The logical progression of the tale takes a violent turn when the children eventually revolted against their captor. After burning the asylum to the ground, they vanished into the surrounding forest to live as a feral, secretive community. Over decades, the stories evolved. Travelers reported seeing small, spindly figures with enlarged craniums darting across the road or peering through the brush with glowing eyes. They are said to be fiercely protective of their territory, sometimes pelting passing cars with stones to drive outsiders away. While historians point to abandoned structures and local folklore as the true source of the myth, the fear remains remarkably consistent across 3 different states. The Melonheads serve as a grim reminder of how we handle those we cast out of society, transforming a tragic medical reality into a lingering suburban nightmare. The Rake. Waking up in the middle of the night to the sensation of being watched is a common trick of the mind, but the legend of the Rake suggests that sometimes the figure at the foot of your bed is terrifyingly real. Unlike ghosts that flicker in and out of existence, this entity is described as a physical, biological nightmare. A pale, hairless humanoid that crouches in a distorted, animal-like posture. The sightings of this creature began to gain momentum in the early 2000s, following a series of unexplained encounters in the rural, northeastern United States. Witnesses describe a being with greyish skin and deeply recessed black eyes that seem to reflect no light. Its most distinguishing feature and the source of its name are its hands. They are equipped with long, sharp claws that it uses to move with an unsettling, skittering speed across floors and up the sides of houses. The progression of an encounter usually begins with the victim finding the creature sitting at the edge of their bed, simply staring. It doesn't immediately attack. Instead, it waits for the person to notice its presence. Those who have survived these moments report a feeling of intense, paralyzing dread. The legend took a darker turn when a collection of supposed suicide notes and journal entries surfaced, all detailing a lifelong stalking by a creature that would whisper to its victims in their sleep, slowly driving them toward a breaking point. While the Rake is widely recognized as a product of early internet folklore, its impact on the real world is undeniable. It tapped into a primal fear of the intruder in the bedroom, creating a modern myth that feels as ancient as the shadows in a dark forest. It serves as a chilling reminder that in the digital age, a story can become so vivid that we start checking the foot of our beds before turning out the light. The Backrooms. The unsettling feeling of a floorboard giving way beneath your feet usually ends with a simple trip or a bruised ego. But in the deepest corners of internet folklore, a misstep can result in you falling right out of reality. This phenomenon is known as no-clipping, a transition where a person accidentally passes through solid matter and wakes up in a place that shouldn't exist. You aren't in a cave or a basement, you are in the back rooms. The environment is immediately recognizable and deeply unnerving. It is a sprawling, seemingly infinite maze of empty office rooms, all defined by a specific, sickly shade of yellow wallpaper. The air is thick with the smell of damp, old carpet, and the only sound is the relentless, oppressive hum of flickering fluorescent lights. There are no windows, no furniture, and no clear exits, just thousands of miles of identical, empty hallways that loop back on themselves in a way that defies geometry. The terror of the Backrooms lies in its familiarity. It looks like a place you've been before. A quiet hallway in a school after hours or a deserted office building during a weekend, but stripped of all human life. As you wander through the yellow haze, the psychological weight of the isolation begins to take hold. The silence is so absolute that you start to hear things in the walls, leading to the nagging suspicion that while the rooms appear empty, you might not be alone. Whether this place is a glitch in the fabric of the universe or a manifestation of collective modern anxiety, the legend has grown into a massive digital mythology. It serves as a chilling reminder of the fragility of our surroundings. It suggests that the solid world we trust is actually just a thin veil, and one wrong step could leave you lost forever in the endless, humming yellow void. The Mandela Effect. Trusting your own memory is the foundation of your identity, but that confidence shatters the moment you realize thousands of strangers share a vivid, detailed recollection of a history that never actually happened. This isn't a simple case of forgetfulness. It is a widespread phenomenon where a massive group of people remembers a specific fact, logo, or event differently than how it exists in the physical world today. The name comes from a bizarre discovery in the early 2000s when a paranormal researcher realized that she, along with countless others, distinctly remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s. They recalled news coverage of his funeral and even a poignant speech by his widow. In reality, Mandela was released in 1990 and lived for decades afterward. This revelation acted as a catalyst, uncovering a hidden layer of shared false memories across global culture. The phenomenon appears in the most mundane places. People remember a popular series of children's books about a family of bears being spelled with an E instead of an A. Others vividly recall a famous brand of peanut butter having the name Jiffy when it has always been Jif. There are even those who swear a certain monocle-wearing board game mascot actually never wore a monocle at all. When these discrepancies are pointed out, the reaction is rarely a simple shrug. Instead, it triggers a deep, visceral sense of unease. Some suggest we are experiencing the merging of parallel timelines or a glitch in a digital simulation. More grounded explanations point to how the human brain reconstructs memories, filling in gaps with logical but incorrect details. Regardless of the cause, the legend remains a chilling reminder that our reality might be more fluid than we care to admit, and the past we remember so clearly might be a story we are all accidentally writing together. Polybius. The rhythmic pulse of a glowing screen and the electronic chime of a high-score leaderboard were the primary draws of the 1980s arcade scene. But in a small corner of Portland, Oregon, one machine allegedly offered something much darker. Legend has it that a mysterious new cabinet appeared in a handful of suburbs, featuring a simple, stark title, Polybius. It didn't have the colourful characters of its neighbours, yet it drew players in with an almost magnetic intensity. The game itself was described as a fast-paced, abstract puzzle that utilised intense geometric shapes and flashing lights. However, the experience of playing it went far beyond typical entertainment. Local rumours suggested that teenagers who spent too much time at the controls began suffering from a strange series of psychological side effects. They reported intense night terrors, sudden bouts of amnesia, and a complete loss of interest in other games. Some even claim to see subliminal messages flickering beneath the surface of the graphics. The most unsettling detail of the mystery involved the people who maintained the machines. Unlike the usual arcade mechanics, these men dressed in black suits and arrived during off hours. They didn't collect the quarters from the coin slots. Instead, they opened the back of the cabinets to extract data logs, seemingly monitoring the player's psychological reactions rather than the machine's profit. As quickly as the game appeared, it vanished. Within just 1 month, every Polybius machine was pulled from the arcades, leaving no physical evidence behind. While many dismiss it as an early internet myth or a cautionary tale about the addictive nature of technology, the story persists as the ultimate urban legend of the digital age. It taps into a lingering suspicion that our entertainment might sometimes be used as a tool for observation, turning a simple trip to the arcade into a forgotten experiment in human behavior. The Max Headroom Incident. A relaxing evening of television relies on the unspoken trust that the signal being beamed into your home is coming from a secure, professional source. That sense of safety was shattered for thousands of viewers in Chicago on a November night in 1987. During the late-night news and later during a broadcast of a popular science fiction show, the screen suddenly flickered into static, replaced by a flickering, low-quality video of a man wearing a distorted rubber mask of the digital character Max Headroom. The intrusion was not a simple glitch. It was a sophisticated act of signal hijacking that bypassed the security of 2 major television stations. The figure in the mask swayed erratically against a rotating background of corrugated metal, his voice a distorted, buzzing garble. He laughed manically and performed bizarre, nonsensical actions, including being swatted with a fly swatter by an off-screen accomplice. The broadcast lasted only 90 seconds, but the sheer randomness and the eerie, low-budget aesthetic felt like a transmission from another dimension. What makes this incident truly unsettling is the total lack of resolution. Hijacking a powerful broadcast signal requires expensive equipment, precise timing, and a deep understanding of microwave frequencies. It wasn't something a bored teenager could do from a basement. Despite a massive investigation by the federal government and local authorities, the perpetrators were never found. They managed to seize control of the airwaves, taunt a major metropolitan audience, and vanish back into the shadows of the city without leaving a single trace of their identity or their motive. Decades later, the mystery remains one of the most famous unsolved crimes in the history of telecommunications. It serves as a chilling reminder of the hidden vulnerabilities in the technology we use every day, proving that even in our most private spaces, the screen can be hijacked by a total stranger with an unknown agenda. Number stations. Scanning through the static of a shortwave radio, you expect to find the faint music of a foreign broadcast or the chatter of amateur operators. But sometimes you stumble upon something that feels like it was never meant for your ears. A rhythmic chime begins, followed by the cold, monotone voice of a woman or even a child, reciting a seemingly endless string of random numbers. These are the number stations, and they have been broadcasting into the void for over half a century. These stations operate on frequencies that can travel thousands of miles, crossing oceans and borders with ease. They don't have a name, a location, or an official schedule. One of the most famous, nicknamed the Buzzer, has emitted a constant droning tone since the late 70s, only occasionally interrupted by a voice reading names and numbers in Russian. When you hear them, you aren't listening to a weather report or a radio play. You are listening to the hidden machinery of global espionage. The logic behind these broadcasts is chillingly simple. In an age of digital tracking and satellite surveillance, a radio signal is nearly impossible to trace to a specific recipient. Anyone with a basic shortwave receiver can listen in, but only someone with a specific one-time use code can turn that string of numbers into a message. It is a foolproof way for a government to send instructions to a field agent deep undercover in a foreign country without ever leaving a digital footprint. The real terror lies in the silence between the numbers. Because these stations are tied to high-stakes intelligence, changes in their patterns often signal major world events. Some believe that if certain stations ever stop broadcasting, it could trigger an automated military response. They remain a haunting, low-fidelity echo of a secret world, proving that even in our connected age, the airwaves are still filled with ghosts carrying secrets that could change the world. Cicada 3 simtiviens. Finding a hidden message on the internet is usually just a clever marketing trick or a simple game. But in early 2012, a single image posted to an anonymous message board sparked the most complex mystery of the digital age. The image featured a simple white cicada on a black background, with a message stating that highly intelligent individuals were being sought. What followed was a global scavenger hunt that moved from the digital world into the physical one, leaving even the most brilliant minds in a state of confusion. The puzzle progressed through layers of deep web layers, requiring expertise in ancient literature, obscure philosophy, and advanced mathematics. Unlike a standard riddle, this path led to physical locations. GPS coordinates appeared, leading participants to telephone poles in cities like Paris, Seoul, and Los Angeles, where physical posters featuring the cicada and a scannable code were taped up. This proved that whoever was behind the mystery had a massive international reach. As the few remaining participants reached the end of the trail, the tone shifted from a game to something much more secretive. They were invited into a private communication channel, only to be told that the group behind the puzzle was not a corporation or a government agency, but an anonymous collective dedicated to digital privacy and freedom. Shortly after, the trail went cold. The website vanished, the accounts went silent, and those who reportedly won the challenge were never heard from again. The mystery of Cicada 3301 remains unsolved. No one has ever successfully unmasked the organizers, and their true purpose, whether they were recruiting for an elite think tank or something more shadow-like, stays hidden. It stands as a chilling reminder that there are still dark, unmapped corners of the internet where people are watching, testing, and recruiting in total silence. Sad, Satan. The internet has many dark corners, but few places are as deeply unsettling as the hidden layers where a person can stumble upon something that truly feels like it was never meant to be seen. In mid-2015, a mysterious link appeared on a deep web forum leading to a download for a game called Sad Satan. What began as a curiosity for horror enthusiasts quickly spiraled into one of the most disturbing chapters in digital history, because this wasn't just a game designed to scare you. It felt like a piece of malware for the human mind. The experience of playing Sad Satan is a descent into a sensory nightmare. There are no clear objectives, scores, or enemies. Instead, the player wanders through a series of long, flickering hallways rendered in grainy black and white. The visuals are constantly distorted by static, while the audio consists of slowed down, backwards recordings of heavy breathing and rhythmic, metallic thumping. As you walk, The game occasionally flashes high contrast, disturbing photos of historical figures or crime scenes, disappearing before your brain can fully process what it just saw. The logic of the mystery took a darker turn when it was revealed that the version circulating online was far more dangerous than a simple horror experience. The original files reportedly contained highly illegal and traumatic imagery hidden within the game's code, alongside malicious software designed to destroy the player's computer. The creator, known only as Obscure Horror Corner, claimed the files were sent to him by an anonymous source, but the trail went cold almost immediately. Sad Satan stands out because it blurred the line between a fictional ghost story and a very real, tangible threat. It serves as a chilling reminder that the deep web isn't just a place for secrets. It is a void where the anonymous can hide truly dark intentions behind the flickering screen of a simple game. The Great Smog of 1952, a thick, yellow haze drifting through the streets of London, is a familiar image from Victorian novels, but in December of 1952, the city encountered a fog that was no longer a literary atmosphere. It was a literal death trap. For 5 days, a massive blanket of stagnant air settled over the city, trapping the smoke from millions of coal fires and industrial chimneys at street level. What started as a typical chilly evening quickly transformed into a sensory nightmare that turned the world's most modern city into a silent, sunless tomb. The progression of the disaster was as quiet as it was relentless. The smog became so dense that visibility dropped to nearly zero. People reported being unable to see their own feet while walking, and public transportation ground to a complete halt. Even indoors, the air was not safe. The soot-heavy mist seeped under doors and through window cracks, filling theatres and homes with a stinging metallic stench. It wasn't just difficult to see, it was becoming impossible to breathe. Because the fog was a common occurrence, the true scale of the tragedy wasn't immediately obvious. It was only when funeral homes began running out of coffins and florists ran out of flowers that the city realized the air itself was killing them. The sulphurous smoke was essentially creating a mild acid in the lungs of anyone who inhaled it. By the time the wind finally shifted and cleared the sky, thousands of people had perished, and many more were left with permanent respiratory damage. The Great Smog remains a terrifying example of how a natural weather event can combine with human industry to create a localized apocalypse. It was a silent, invisible killer that didn't haunt a single house, but an entire civilization. Dancing Plague of 1518. A celebratory dance is usually a sign of joy, but in the summer of 1518, the people of Strasbourg watched in horror as a simple rhythmic movement transformed into a lethal, unstoppable compulsion. It began with a single woman, Frau Trophea, who stepped into a narrow street and began to dance fervently. There was no music playing, and her expression remained blank and distant, yet she continued to move with an intensity that defied exhaustion. The situation moved from a local curiosity to a full-blown crisis within days. Within a week, 30 others had joined her, and by the end of the month, nearly 400 people were dancing through the streets under the blistering summer sun. This was not a choice. The dancers were in a state of visible agony, screaming for help and begging to stop, yet their limbs continued to twitch and leap as if controlled by invisible strings. The city's leaders and doctors were baffled. In a disastrous attempt to cure the phenomenon, they concluded that the victims simply needed to dance it out of their systems. They constructed a wooden stage and hired professional musicians to keep the rhythm going, which only fueled the fire. The relentless physical exertion began to take a toll. People started collapsing from sheer exhaustion, while others suffered from strokes and heart attacks, dying right there on the pavement while their feet continued to move. Modern historians have struggled to explain the event. Some suggest a mass psychogenic illness triggered by extreme famine and disease, while others point to a possible mold on the local grain that caused hallucinations and muscle spasms. Regardless of the cause, the dancing plague remains a terrifying reminder of how a single, unexplained spark can ignite a collective madness that consumes an entire community from the inside out. Lake Anjikuni disappearance, the crackle of a warm fire, and the smell of cooking food are usually signs of a welcoming home, but in the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, they once served as the backdrop for an impossible vanishing act. In November of 1930, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle trekked through the subarctic cold toward a familiar Inuit village on the shores of Lake Anjikuni. He expected a warm greeting from the community of nearly 30 people, but instead, he walked into a silent, frozen snapshot of a life that had simply stopped mid-sentence. As LaBelle moved through the settlement, the logical progression of a busy day was visible everywhere, yet not a single soul was in sight. He found pots of caribou stew still hanging over cold hearths, and finished shirts, with the needles still stuck in the fabric. The villagers' most vital survival tools, their rifles, were leaning against the walls of their huts, and their kayaks were lined up on the shore. In the brutal environment of the Arctic, no one would ever leave their food, their shelter, or their protection behind willingly. The mystery deepened when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived to investigate. They discovered two details that defied explanation. First, they found a group of sled dogs that had starved to death, despite being tied up just yards away from food. More disturbingly, they found that several ancestral graves had been emptied. The ground was frozen solid, requiring immense effort to dig, yet the bodies had been removed with surgical precision. The Lake Anjikuni disappearance remains a chilling puzzle because it offers no tracks, no signs of struggle, and no survivors. An entire community seemed to blink out of existence, leaving their world behind, as if they expected to return in a second, but never did. It serves as a haunting reminder of how the vast, empty spaces of our world can sometimes swallow the things we think are most secure. The cursed forest. Trees are usually the lungs of our planet, but in the Hoia Bațiu forest of Romania, the vegetation feels more like a rib cage, trapping something ancient and restless inside. Often called the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania, this dense woodland has a reputation that makes even the most experienced local woodsman refuse to enter after the sun begins to set. It isn't just the shadows that are unsettling, it is the way the environment itself seems to reject the laws of nature. The mystery starts with the trees. Throughout the heart of the forest, the trunks don't grow straight toward the sky. Instead, they twist and spiral into bizarre skeletal shapes, all curving in the exact same clockwise direction, as if following an invisible magnetic force. In the center of this growth lies a perfect circle where absolutely nothing grows. Soil samples show no biological reason for the barren patch, yet for decades, not a single blade of grass has managed to break through the surface of this dead zone. People who venture into the woods often experience a rapid, logical progression of physical symptoms. It usually begins with a sudden, overwhelming feeling of being watched, followed by intense nausea and unexplained rashes that appear on the skin within minutes. More chilling are the reports of missing time. Travelers have entered the forest for a short walk and emerged hours or even days later with no memory of where they had been or how they had spent the intervening time. Whether these phenomena are caused by strange magnetic anomalies or something more spectral, the forest remains a living legend. It serves as a stark reminder that despite our maps and technology, there are still pockets of the world where the ground beneath our feet follows a different set of rules entirely. The brain-eating amoeba, a refreshing plunge into a sun-drenched lake, is the highlight of a summer afternoon, a way to escape the heat and feel completely at peace with nature. But in the warm, stagnant waters of the southern United States and beyond, a microscopic predator waits for the perfect moment to hitch a ride. It isn't looking for a meal in the traditional sense, it is looking for a path into the most protected part of the human body. This organism is a single-celled life form that thrives in the sediment at the bottom of freshwater ponds and poorly maintained pools. It remains harmless as long as it stays in the water, or even if it is swallowed. The danger begins the moment a person jumps in and water is forced high up into the nasal cavity. Using the olfactory nerve as a direct highway, the predator bypasses the body's usual defenses and enters the brain. The progression of the infection is as swift as it is devastating. It starts with a simple headache or a stiff neck, symptoms so common they are often ignored or mistaken for a summer cold. However, within a few days, the organism begins to multiply and consume brain tissue, leading to confusion, loss of balance, and eventually a total system failure. By the time the severity of the situation is realized, the window for effective treatment has almost always closed. While these encounters are incredibly rare, the legend of the hidden killer in the water persists because of its invisible, random nature. It transforms a place of recreation and joy into a site of hidden biological risk. It serves as a sobering reminder that sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't the monsters we can see, but the tiny, mindless hitchhikers waiting for a single splash of water to change a life forever. SCP Foundation. Imagine stumbling across a hidden, unsecured database on the internet, filled with thousands of highly classified documents detailing monsters, anomalous objects, and world-ending threats. This is the exact experience of discovering the SCP Foundation, a phenomenon that has evolved into the most expansive and terrifying urban legend of the digital age. While the archive is actually a massive collaborative fiction project, the sheer volume and clinical realism of the entries have convinced countless readers that a shadow organization is actively protecting humanity from things that completely defy the laws of biology and physics. The foundation of this modern myth is built entirely on its cold, bureaucratic tone. The fictional organization operates with a single, brutal mandate: secure, contain, and protect. The documents read perfectly like authentic government leaks, cataloguing everything from a seemingly harmless concrete statue that moves with lethal speed when unobserved, to an endless, unlit staircase hiding a predatory entity in the dark. Instead of relying on traditional scares, the horror comes from the meticulous, detached scientific containment procedures used to keep these impossible anomalies locked away from the public eye. Expendable test subjects are routinely sacrificed just to learn how an object functions, adding a layer of ruthless pragmatism to the organization's survival tactics. The true power of the SCP Foundation lies in its presentation. By using heavily redacted text, fake security clearance levels, and interconnected experiment logs, the community has constructed a shared universe that feels intensely plausible. It taps directly into a widespread modern distrust of secretive institutions and the lingering suspicion that our reality is far more fragile than it appears. The SCP universe proves that the scariest legends no longer need to be passed down around a campfire. They can be built, case file by case file, on the internet. The Phantom Barber. The vulnerability of sleep is something we all accept every night, trusting that our locked doors and quiet neighborhoods will keep the world at bay. But in the summer of 1942, the residents of Pascagoula, Mississippi, realized that a locked door was no match for a predator who wasn't after their money or their lives, but their hair. They called him the Phantom Barber, a shadow who turned the sanctuary of the bedroom into a site of bizarre, ritualistic violation. The mystery followed a chillingly consistent pattern. People would wake up in the dead of night to the sound of a window screen being sliced open. When they sat up in the dark, they wouldn't find their valuables missing. Instead, they would find a lock of their hair missing, cleanly snipped away while they slept. In some cases, the intruder would even cut through the mosquito netting over a child's bed just to take a single golden curl. As the summer progressed, the logic of the town's safety began to unravel. This wasn't a standard thief. The intruder left no footprints, no fingerprints, and never took anything of material value. The terror came from the intimacy of the act. To cut someone's hair while they breathe in their sleep requires a level of proximity and stealth that suggested the barber was watching his victims long before he struck. He knew exactly where they slept and how deeply they dreamed. The panic eventually led to the arrest of a local man, but many remained unconvinced that the true phantom had been caught. The legend persists because it highlights a specific, creeping fear, the realization that you are never truly alone, even in the dark. It serves as a reminder that the most unsettling intruders aren't always looking to cause physical harm. Sometimes they just want to take a piece of you with them into the night. The Tulpa Effect. The human mind is a powerful engine capable of building entire worlds in the span of a single dream. But what happens when a thought becomes so heavy and persistent that it begins to manifest in the physical world? This is the core of the Tulpa Effect. It suggests that if you focus your willpower and imagination on a specific idea for long enough, that idea can eventually detach itself from your mind and take on a life of its own, becoming an entity that others can see, hear, and feel. The progression of creating such a being usually begins as a deliberate mental exercise. A person might spend hours every day visualizing the details of a companion, the texture of their clothes, the sound of their voice, and the specific way they walk. Initially, the creator is in total control, treating the figure like an imaginary friend. However, as the mental energy intensifies, the dynamic begins to shift. The companion starts to speak without being prompted and develops a personality that the creator didn't consciously design. The true terror of the legend emerges when the entity achieves independence. There are accounts of these thought forms becoming visible to strangers who have no knowledge of the creator's mental work. Even more unsettling is the idea that once a thought is given life, it cannot be easily taken back. Like a child outgrowing a parent, a persistent thought form can become rebellious or even hostile, manifesting as a shadow in the corner of a room or a cold breath on the neck of its creator. Whether this is a literal supernatural event or a profound psychological break, it serves as a chilling warning about the weight of our own focus. It suggests that our thoughts are not just private reflections, but potential blueprints for a reality we might not be able to control.